All right, and then Nate, if you just want to get the presentation up.
There we
Thank
go.
you.
How's that look?
Beautiful.
Good.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for Sprocket's webinar, Lessons Learned Physical Penetration Testing. So before we get started, just have a few housekeeping items to go over. So Nate, if you just want to go to the next slide. First, just want to say who from Sprocket Security is on this call. So you have myself, Carly Hochstein, that I'm the marketing specialist here at Sprocket, and I will be the moderator for this call. And then Nate, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nate Fair, and I'm a penetration tester at Sprocket. I've been here almost 3 years. And before that, I was also a penetration tester at a telecommunications company where I basically did the same thing, penetration testing and social engineering, all of the fun hackery stuff.
All right, so just a few items before we get started. First off, this webinar is being recorded and you guys will have access to it right after this call or after the webinar. You'll get an email notification with the link to the recording, and then you'll also be able to access it through RevNet, which is the platform we're using for this webinar. So you can just log into your account and you'll see the recording there. Secondly, you are able to take notes as you go throughout the webinar. So if there's anything that you might want to reference later on, if you watch the recording, just type out your notes as you go and they will be time stamped to when you put them down. And then finally, we will have a Q&A section at the end. So feel free to type any questions in the chat as we go, but we just ask that you stay on mute until the actual Q&A section. And then at that time, you can ask your question out loud or you can type it in the chat. And with that, I will pass it back to you, Nate, to get started.
All right. Thanks, Carly. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks again. I want to thanks everybody again for joining. And today we're going to talk about physical penetration testing. You'll see it referenced throughout the talk as PPT. Sometimes I'll reference it as a physical assessment or physical security assessment. Those are all the same things. Over the next 45 minutes or so, I just kind of wanted to have a discussion on some of the things that I myself do when I'm conducting a physical security assessment, and then we'll walk through some use cases, rather when things are successful, when they're not so successful, some lessons learned and failures, and highlighting some of those things. And then I thought it would be a fun little thing at the end to show you how you can possibly use a little bit of AI. It's a little buzzwordy, I know, but I promise it's pretty cool. So like I said, I just kind of want to have this as a sort of a fun, laid back type of thing. So, like I mentioned before, I'm a penetration tester at Sprocket. For those of you who may not be totally familiar, that means that a large part of my job is conducting penetration tests. So that means we are constantly looking for vulnerabilities in computer networks and in the digital realm, and we're highlighting those vulnerabilities so that our clients can then apply security controls in place to prevent the malicious exploitation of those vulnerabilities. So a part of being a penetration tester and a consultant is also performing social engineering. So of course, that's more traditionally known as doing things like sending phishing emails or vishing, or something else to sort of extract useful information from people, like credentials, whether that's through a malicious login page that we craft, or calling somebody on the phone and pretending to be IT. So physical penetration testing is a little different, but it's still very much an important part. So unlike the traditional penetration testing that I just described, physical penetration testing, we are testing physical, real world things that you can interact with. So those are things like physical barriers, security camera placements, security protocols that are in place, and human security measures to identify vulnerabilities within your physical environment. So I just want to give, I know I just kind of just described a physical penetration test, but I would like to give a more formal definition. This is from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. They're a federally mandated and regulated body that is, in charge of a lot of um, network infrastructure for the federal government. And they define it as a physical penetration test is a process in which the tester identifies and exploits vulnerabilities within an organization's physical barriers and controls. It is for organizations to gain insight towards their physical security protocols and improve them, which is just like a normal traditional penetration test. So when I explain this to my friends and family, they basically ask, so companies hire you to break into their offices? And pretty much like, yeah, just like we conduct the normal pen testing, we do the same thing in the physical world. So I want to talk about some really important things that go into the preparation of preparing a physical penetration test. And the very first thing, all of these things are extremely important, but you know, each one has its own sort of caveat in the overall importance Venn diagram. And so, the first thing that I have up there is that talks about the scope and goals. And so, when we talk about the scope and goals, this is essentially what we're trying to get from the client. We want to know what they want to know. We want to determine what their specific goals are, because sometimes a client might be more interested in how their security cameras are laid out at a secure record keeping facility versus having sensitive documents lying around, right? Sometimes a company doesn't necessarily have a very strong or enforced clear text passwords on post-it notes on the computer type thing versus having a well regulated and responsive security and security staff and personnel on site. So when we have a traditional kickoff call where we go over the scope and the goals, that's something that's really important, because that then also dictates the next two things that you see, the type of team that you would sort of want to assemble, Avengers style, and then the type of reconnaissance that you ultimately end up conducting too. So with the goal sort of set up, like I mentioned, we'd like to slightly add a little caveat in with what I am describing as physical penetration testing. And we like to add on that it's no knowledge, non destructive, which is fairly self explanatory, but that means basically two things. While I am trying to break into a otherwise secure environment, I'm not going to be cutting deadbolts or battering down doors or taking employees hostage, right? The focus of really on what we're doing is combining the aspects of the physical security controls with social engineering. And so that means talking to people with a smile, nodding along, and getting useful information that aids in our ability to bypass certain physical controls. So that's the non-destructive part. And then the no knowledge part is exactly what it sounds like. The only people who are aware that I will be on site as with some glasses and a construction vest or in a clipboard in my hand, typically, right, are either a director of physical security, the director of information technology, and that's it, right? The whole purpose of this is to test the ability of employees, and if security personnel is in place, to test their response to bypass attempts and thwarting those attempts of the physical infrastructure that we are tasked with breaching. And finally, the probably one of the most important things, again, is your letter of authorization. So this quite literally is a get out of jail free card that you carry with you at all times while performing work for the client. It is literally a piece of paper on shared company letterhead detailing the scope of work, the things that I will be allowed to be doing. This is the addresses where I will physically be located while performing that work. And then, of course, these are signatures that have belonged to the people who have authorized this engagement in the first place. And so, in the event that I am close, or rather, in the event that I am or close to being detained by security staff, hopefully, it's never come to the actual law enforcement and police officers, but this is a piece of paper that I keep in my back pocket that you can present and hopefully be set free when the primary contact informs whoever the responding officer that I am authorized to be doing what I'm doing. Of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention anybody here who is familiar with the space is very much familiar with a rather infamous case back in, I think it was 2019 or so. There was another physical security company and penetration testing company that was performing a physical penetration test for a city in Iowa, and they were tasked, like you do in a physical security assessment, to gain unauthorized access to a records keeping department, so sort of like belong to the county, and they breached the building in the middle of the night. That set off some form of silent alarm, and they were promptly arrested and spent the night in jail for 24 hours with a $100,000 bond or something like that. And even at the insistence, right, of that letter telling the arresting officer, hey, we are allowed to be here. And there ended up being some miscommunication between the people who had authorized the engagement and the appropriate stakeholders for the county in which they were doing this. And so again, that's why the scope is very, very important, and hammering all of that stuff out, and why having your contacts, somebody on the other end of the phone, being able to really verify that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Of course, I've always, and I should say that at the very end of everything, they were exonerated. Charges were dropped, I believe. I feel like it would have been a bigger deal, but so things can get a little dicey sometimes. And I've kind of always thought it would be fun to edit the letter of authorization that I have to have fake phone numbers and fake contacts of people, so I can have someone else from Sprocket answer the phone if and when I eventually do get caught, which again would sort of test the security personnel and their responses based on, they probably have a security protocol in place that says if and when something like this happens, they have a known good phone number or a known good email address to contact. And it would be interesting if you could potentially try and bypass that, right, by giving you a fake letter. Of course, you very much run the risk of getting yourself into more hot water, because who's going to believe that you have a real letter of authorization? And after reading that story, I'm just really not quite so sure. So when it comes to selecting teams, I know this is all sort of sounding very Ocean's 11-y, but it kind of very much is. Sometimes you conduct these things alone. Other times you do have additional teammates. So, ideally, you would have someone who maybe specializes or really enjoys lock picking. You go to any security conference, any hacker conference, there's always going to be a lock picking area, lock picking village with various different types of locks and things like that. And that's very much something that you would be doing on an actual physical pen test. Other people, very much enjoy cloning badges and figuring out ways to bypass the physical things that rather the physical plus digital things that act as barriers to entry here. So you need the right people for the right specific task, and sometimes you just end up doing them solo too. And then the final stage that I have here that I think is, there's a lot of important things, but the last one, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the lessons learned, is reconnaissance, which is simply just gathering information about the target. So that actually means, right, downloading and looking at blueprints if you can get a hold of them. Going on Google Earth and Google Street View to try to get a solid idea of how the building is laid out and possible points of entry. This means, if time permitting, actually staking out employees and their routines, right? Can you identify that, a big group of 20 employees leaves every day right around noon and goes to a coffee shop around the corner? That may provide you an avenue of possible tailgating. You go and hang out at the coffee shop, and then you just waltz right back in when lunch is over. And other times, you just have to be on site, right? You have to physically assess the building that you're tasked with gaining entry to. And so when I do these things, right, it's usually being as covert as possible, taking pictures of cameras, taking pictures of doors and the locks that are on those doors, getting idea of badge readers, things like that. This is purely from a covert phase that we're still in right now, and gathering as much information as you can will only help you be able to hopefully have success when it is time to actually perform the engagement. Another thing that reconnaissance is very helpful in doing is, of course, gathering names and a list of employees and their positions at the organization that you're targeting. So, the go-to, of course, is LinkedIn. So I'll go on LinkedIn and figure out, what specific employees are at a specific location. It would be really bad, for example, if you were to try and show up and say you have a food delivery for Lisa, and you didn't do your due diligence, and Lisa posted on Facebook that she's on vacation for the week, right? That would kind of blow your cover there. So being able to, successfully gather these various types of intelligence and reconnaissance definitely helps, you know, being it definitely helps in being successful. Okay, so I want to walk you through. This is a really, really fun engagement that I did a few years ago, where I was tasked with gaining access to a very, very large um, financial institution and in a downtown giant metropolitan area with me and a coworker. And this was a 5-day engagement. So we had all week to do whatever we wanted, basically. And so it actually started on Monday, and we, spent the day just sort of casually walking around. And this was it was an early fall, so weather is just beautiful, and people are walking all about and things like this. And once we got enough covert pictures of their security cameras, all of these things, it was sort of time to kick the tires just a little bit, because you don't want to really risk, kicking the tires too hard before you even really make entry. And so I remember I had walked into one of the side entrances and was immediately approached by a security guard. Excuse me. And I remember I had a water bottle in my hand. It's kind of hot for the time of year it was, and I asked if I could use the restroom, and the reason that I asked that, one, is because I'm trying to get a sense of the layout of the inside of the building where I'm going to be making entry later on in the week. I'm trying to just buy time. You can't really go in there without a legitimate reason to be in there. And, I'm in just normal street clothes. And the security guard he said, basically, no, get lost. We don't let, uh, you know, random people just in off the street to use the restrooms. There's no public restrooms. I'm just like, okay, fine. That's totally cool. So a couple days go by, and now we have to come up with a pretext, right? That we have to come up with a cover story, a legitimate reason for being there. That also provides us with a eh, with the ability to also carry things like our computers and lockpick sets and network implants and things like that you perform after you've made entry. And so what we decided on was we were going to celebrate the engagement of a couple that we had discovered was on LinkedIn. Um, and so what we did was we ordered this big bouquet of flowers, lots of balloons, and a box of chocolates. And this was, one of those Esther Price double layered box of chocolates. And underneath that top layer of chocolates was a Raspberry Pi with a wireless antenna running a bunch of sort of wireless reconnaissance things, looking for open access points and sort of doing your traditional scanning of the wireless infrastructure. And so we're all set up, we're ready to go. And I make entry and I approach the same security guard. And we had waited a couple days. So luckily, uh, I, I don't think he recognized me, but I'll show you in the next slide. He may have. And I tell him that I'm actually there to deliver this big congratulatory arrangement of things. And he tells me that all deliveries have to go through this little side entrance area. So I'm like, all right, that's fine. And as I'm walking over there, the lady comes down. I'm sorry, not the lady. A lady comes down and is fawning over the stuff. And I say, I'm here to deliver the stuff for Marcia. And she just so happens to work in the same cubicle area as Marcia. And she said, I would be happy um, to deliver this and give this to her. Now, that was not part of the plan, right? The part of the plan, or rather, the plan was for me to personally deliver these, but never actually making my way to complete the delivery, right? I was going to break away and just start my assessment once I got past that security guard. So I had handed her a fake ledger that I had created, and she signed it and everything. And all the while this whole commotion was going down, my coworker had slipped by and he's up on the elevator already. So from that moment, it was already a good start to the engagement because the security guard obviously was supposed to make sure that no random person can just come off the street and access the elevators. I bought myself some time. Our wireless box of chocolates was also doing its thing while we're working our way through there. And then as I get ready to turn to leave, I again ask the same security guard if I can use the restroom. This time, he lets me, and he points me down the hall where I make my first right, and I never go to the bathroom. I find an unlocked stairwell. I climb the stairwell, and now we're both in. And I'm dressed not I'm not dressed like you would think somebody who works at a place like this should be dressed. So I'm fairly underdressed. But my coworker, he had the full get up and everything and a laptop. And from there, we were completely unfettered, had complete unfettered access for 5 or 6 hours, pretty much the whole day. And we photographed and we, found passwords, and we had taken, documentation and things that the client was very interested in making sure never left the premise, and which we did, of course, but also, of course, was returned. Um, so once we finished wrapping all of this stuff up, we had learned. So that was pretty much the engagement. It was very, very exciting. That was also very stress inducing because it is, it does freak you out when you're in a place where you're not supposed to be, knowing that you're not supposed to be there, knowing that you could, be approached at any time. However, come to find out afterwards, once we had, finished doing the debrief, was that we were actually really, really close, to escalating this very much further than what we wanted to. And by that, I mean, remember that box of chocolates? It turns out that Raspberry Pi had actually started to overheat, and it started to melt those chocolates. And the lady that I handed those off to contacted her boss, who just so happened to be our point of contact, and she was ready to call the bomb squad. And thankfully, that never happened because we did have, a piece, one of our business cards in there saying, if found, this is part of an authorized engagement. And luckily, her boss knew that we weren't supposed to, or that we were supposed to be there. So that's sort of like my be careful right here. Another fun thing that also turned out after that engagement was, as we were, like I mentioned, we're hanging out and sort of doing our traditional reconnaissance earlier in the week. It turns out that we were on their radar from the get-go. This was taken from one of those very high dome security cameras that exist on the top of 20-story buildings. And they were kind enough afterwards. Everybody, tensions are a little less once things are completed and wrapped up. And the security guard was kind enough to give me and my coworker the bolo, the be on the lookout printout that had been circulating throughout the week at this place. And so, not really sure why I was able to make my way into uh, into the building unaffected, even though there was a bolo on us. But this is something that I've kept over the years, and that's me on a street corner with an actual walkie-talkie, walkie-talkieing with my coworker at the time. So some of the lessons learned that I mentioned here are the relax and the smile. And I had mentioned how nervous it can be, and it certainly very much is, panic inducing almost. And I had sort of come to find out that, a lot of times organizations are very much the physical security is very similar to the digital security, right? It's hard on the outside, and then it's Swiss cheese on the inside. And what I mean by that is, you can have all of the locks and the badge readers and the security guards, but once we got inside, even though, it's this kid who is quite literally, I'm sweating through my shirt. Everybody else has three-piece suits on, and I clearly, maybe I could have passed as an intern, but a relaxed smile and just talking a little, a friendly nod. They had never seen me before. I didn't have any identifying information. I didn't have a badge. I didn't have anything like that, and I was never questioned. And that's part of the social engineering aspect of this. Is we fully recommend when we do these for clients to really ensure that they are, they're enforcing a culture of, yes, of course, you don't want your place to be your work environment to be like a jailhouse, but if you don't recognize somebody and they're they don't quite look like they're supposed to be there, and maybe they're walking around unaccompanied like I was, huffing and puffing because I didn't have access to the elevator. I was, only going up the stairwells. You should feel comfortable, approaching them and maybe just asking for if they have a badge or not. And was successfully tailgating everywhere. So that's one of the lessons was once you get inside, from a pen tester's perspective, it shouldn't be as easy as that engagement was. So that was a successful engagement. Let me talk to you about a not so successful one for me, which was a boon for the client. And this was a solo engagement, 1-day engagement, where again I was tasked with gaining access to a data center. And this time, and this sort of falls in, if you stick around, I'll show you some of the cool things that I tried to do with AI it's a little bit different and maybe unconventional, but that falls in part of with my pretext. And this time my pretext was creating a fake appointment with this client, and that meant going online. They have a portal, create an appointment with us. We'd be happy to sit down and talk through whatever it is you want to talk about. And in order to do that, you have to fill out some contact information. So I have I give a fake name, fake email address, virtual phone number, all those things. And so that's my plan, right? My plan is to show up and engage with this fake appointment and see if I can break away the same way that I've done successfully in the past, right? All I want to do is get myself away from the security guards, get myself away from the employees within the building and away from security cameras. So I show up, I have this appointment, and turns out all of the doors are locked. All of this, there's no accessible stairwells at all, badge readers on everything. And so, things aren't looking too good. I don't have very much to do. There's not a lot of things that I can do, and not much to go from here. So I go back and I buy some time, and actually I go back into the lobby where a security guard who had just seen me, maybe 20 minutes prior, I go up and I tell him that I also have an appointment to meet somebody here, somebody that I had looked up on LinkedIn. Work location was right at the location that I'm at. And, he kind of looked at me funny, like he should have. And he was like, "Weren't you just in here for an appointment?" And I was just, I kind of had to play it cool a little bit. And I was like, "Yeah, but I had already had this meeting pre-scheduled. So I figured I could just, knock both things out in the same day." He said, "Sure. Okay." So while he's waiting to, look up the person that I'm supposedly having this meeting with, a shift change, a guard change occurs. And I try the same thing. I try and get that new guard to say, I basically had said, "I know where I'm going. I've been here before. This is not the first time I've done this. Rob, Rob knows me. If you can just let me through, I can just be on my way." And the security guard wasn't having it. And at that point, the assessment is pretty much over, because I felt, and these are things that you kind of have to get an intuitive sense on, is I felt that if I came back again, that the police likely would have been called. And yes, I do have that letter of authorization, but that's really, a last ditch effort to get yourself out. And so that was a failure on my part. Great for the client, right? I mean, they had secu- all the physical security things that at a previous uh, things that had been previously successful. Everything was locked. Even access to the elevators was behind locked badged readers. So security guards weren't buying the fact that I had been here before, um, and and yeah, so it was great for the client. They were very very happy to hear that. So some lessons learned. Let's talk about some things that I could have done maybe better, or could have that might have better informed some of the pretext routes that I had taken. One is better recon, and I say this because I had assumed that the building that I was trying to gain entry to was um, honestly a lot more difficult to get into. I assumed it would be a lot more of a hostile environment. And I could have figured out that it was, in fact, a welcoming environment with a lobby for visitors. If I had maybe done what I had done previously and, gone in there earlier in the day. Now, remember that this was just a 1 day engagement, kick the tires a little bit like I did in the last engagement. And if I would have done that, I'd likely would have changed up my pretext. However, like I mentioned, it's difficult because when you have time constraints like that, I can't blow it in the first hour kicking the tires. If I do, my time is wasted and the client doesn't really get much value in terms of how their security controls and protocols that they have in place are actually working. Another thing that I could have done a little bit better was to verify employment. So, like I mentioned, excuse me, that this was something that was successful in the previous engagement where I get a list of names and positions at the target organization, and then I use that to try my best to build rapport with whoever I'm interacting with. And then I did the same thing. In this case, it was a LinkedIn profile says that they work here, and in fact, um, they had just never updated their LinkedIn when they left. And so I'm not sure if that might have tipped something off to one of the security guards when I said that I was, here for Rob or John or Lisa. Um, but I learned that after the fact. And so, that's kind of that's something I could have maybe done a little bit better on, is really finding a way to additionally verify that somebody works there. So before, LinkedIn had served me well, but next time I know that I'll have something else to potentially another avenue of verification. And then finally having a backup plan when your assumptions completely fly out the door. This sort of ties back into the better recon where I mentioned, you know, I had assumed that I was going to be faced with a lot more hostility, and because of that, that forms my pretext. And if I would have had a maybe a better backup that would have fed that the verify employment might have fed into, I might have been able to, for example, not had to interact with the same security guard, or have taken just a different route when I get in there and discover that all the locks are locked and all the doors are locked and badge readers are engaged. So you get that's just how it is sometimes, right? And it's really great for the client to for me to come back and say, I checked every single outside door, all of your security cameras are working, and I couldn't find any dead spots, so to speak. Your security guards did not let me do anything that I wanted to do. And it it's not fun for me because I wanted to actually break in, but that's good. That's what we're here to do. That's why we do these things, is to make sure that when something happens, are people trained? Do they know what to do when somebody um, isn't supposed to be there, is doing things that sort of are not unfavorable? So okay, I'm going to show a really cool tool that I have previously used again. That you have to forgive me while I get my screen back up. Okay, there we go. So I have used this tool to. This is a tool, and it's called Roop. In this case, this is a modification of the original Roop. This is called Roop Unleashed, and this is a face swapping tool. Now, I have used this in the past when I wanted to create a fake badge. And this is something that, you know, can be argued is, sometimes it's sort of a, so what? You can clone or you can create a fake badge. Can you use the fake badge? Sometimes not. Um, but there's also the other, the other branch is sometimes you don't even need to use your physical badge at a badge reader. Sometimes if you have, a badge that passes the sniff test and looks good from a distance, and, you can, for the most part, pretend to be somebody else, then that's an interesting area to explore, I think, especially when it comes to visual verification of who's supposed to be there and who isn't. So, in a case like this, in one of the examples, or sorry, one of the engagements I did, I actually found somebody who kind of looked a little bit like me, um, and I thought, it would be interesting. Can I use a tool like this? And I'll show you how you can use it. I'm not going to do a real person. Well, I will, but there'll be better examples than myself. But can you can you create um, a passable, a visually, hey Bob, type of decent enough badge by morphing the face of somebody who actually works at your target organization and a photo of yourself. And so this is a very, very, it's incredibly the math and the artificial intelligence and the large language models and the generative adversarial networks and all of these sort of AI buzzwords that go into things like this is actually um, incredibly resource intensive. And while the interface here may look rather mundane or elementary, there's a lot that's sort of going on behind the scenes when it comes to the math and how this goes. So basically, what we're going to do is, so you see, I have Santa Claus, Bill Gates, Will Ferrell, and Elon Musk, and myself as I was coming up with some of these demos here. And you take your target input face, which would be you, and you want to become the potential employer, or rather a new employer at your target organization. So, if, for example, we wanted to combine Elon Musk as the first face, so what this will do is it'll go and basically just extract the face from whatever image that you have here, and then you add in your target face, which would be the headshot or the profile picture of the person who works at the target organization. So it will take these two faces right here and then do some stuff, and we'll see what type of thing we can get. Now, of course, with different types of AI, I'm sure we've all seen sort of you have the telltale signs of things that are very obvious, right? That they are you get random little artifacts and things like that. So in this case right here, this is not bad, right? And actually, the reason that it's a little bit fuzzy and blurry is an actual um, explicit constraint that is built into the tool itself that would prevent the near perfect face morphing ability. So it is it's a well thought out security measure that says you can't do it fully all the way. However, there's a little workaround, and so this is not bad, right? Between Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Of course, this isn't a very practical example, but this is how you could use something like this. And I found another tool. So what we're going to do then with this is not quite badge ready yet. It'll become badge ready when we use another tool, and this is called Nightmare AI, and this will do face correction and adjustable upscaling, which really means that it's going to make the image a little bit bigger and more crisp, but add a little bit of airbrushy AI type of effect to it that I think works pretty well when you actually end up putting it on a badge. So let's try and see what Bill Gates slash Elon Musk would look like on a on a badge, right? So what you'll see in the output here, and it takes like a minute or two, but what you'll see on the output is a larger version that looks pretty. That one doesn't work the best. um, so that's a fun one, and I'm looking at the time here. We'll try one more really quick, and I really liked the way this one worked. So we'll just completely sort of start over, refresh, and uh, we did myself and elf. Let's see how this works. So again, this is, it's not quite there, but this technology and the way that the AI, right, that's a little bit better. And there are others, sure, you could do traditional photoshopping, things like that, but this has never really existed the way that it does right now with the the accessibility that it has. And so I think it's going to be very interesting when it comes to things like I had mentioned, that visual verification without using any second form of authentication. Sort of how we push, rightfully so, to have that across all accounts. I can imagine this as being hey, ringing the security guard over an external interface web, um, like a box that sort of sits on the outside of a building that has a keypad and a camera. And, you ring and you say, my badge isn't working. Here's a picture of my badge, or something like that, right? I'm not really, haven't fully fleshed all of this out, but I think it's really cool and interesting. Honestly, I don't think I look bad as an elf. I would probably wouldn't put that on a badge or anything, but I thought it was a fun little tool that you can really see the cool effects on. And another really interesting thing about this tool in specific is you can do it with webcams, so you can do real time face overlay morphing, which is obviously incredibly powerful. So that's this tool right here. That's Roop Unleashed. And I just wanted to very briefly show a new, something that's new to me, tool and an application called generated.photos. And it is this company that does, does like full AI humans, um, complete, hyper realistic, over 100,000 different variations, and you can go in and you can choose the skin tone, the stance, the age, the ethnicity, um, and it's just kind of crazy. And it's each time you sort of some of these aren't that realistic, but each time you refresh the page and you've got all of these different parameters that you can change. And I think that's also crazy. That's kind of a step up from, things that we've seen in the past, right? With like this person does not exist.com, where you can, select different parameters and it will, create a fake image. I thought was, again, really interesting. And then finally, there's another one called facemorph.me that I came across too, where you can either use a photo of yourself, um, or you can upload an image and you can, in fact, we can see what a face morph maybe of myself and doing Santa Claus would look like. And what's really cool is that you can sort of adjust the slider where it determines when well, I guess that's what I look like when I'm fully bald. So you can use this little slider right here, and it'll take you right sort of through the transformation. So you can pinpoint. I guess that's not quite what I would look like, but we're getting there. So I thought these were all just like very interesting tools that can be used, and at least being highlight them enough to make them a part of the presentation. So that is it for the demos. I know it's not super demo-y in the traditional sense, but Carly, I think maybe I probably did run a little over, but
No,
if we
we are
wanted,
still good with some
okay.
time. So if anybody has any questions, you can go off mute and ask them or type them in the chat, and we can use the remaining time to answer anything.
Nate, what would you say is like, from a pen tester's perspective, your general success rate with regards to physical engagements, and how do you like translate that? Because I know technically your failure would be a success for the client. So how does that how do you navigate that conversation like after the engagement?
Yeah. So so the success rate, I think the framing might be a little bit different when we talk about traditional, right? And like a traditional pen test, you have the spectrum is a lot larger when it comes to, did you find a vulnerability? What were you able to do with that vulnerability? In physical testing, I find it's much more discreet. It's either, you bypassed a physical security control or you didn't. And so I think it makes it a little more difficult to really have a solid, I could personally give you my success rate as a percentage. But I don't think that really serves to highlight how that all fits together when it comes to physical penetration testing. But the second part, or the second question, is really it was a really good one, and one that I really do try and highlight to the client specifically. As a pen tester, you of course you want to guess the password, or you want to successfully land a phishing email in a user's inbox. Those are wins for us, but that means that's a loss for the client. And when it comes to physical security, I really try and highlight the wins that a client can have. And so we, like I mentioned, I highlighted in the after action report that we did with, in both cases, or rather in any case, we really like to call out and highlight, hey, you know your security guards were good, right? They did not fall for any of the tricks that would normally maybe over the phone work. You sometimes you can just call and get them to disclose their shift schedule. If I say I have a delivery, I'm a DoorDash driver, I'm going to be there between 3:30 and 4:30. Can you maybe tell me a little bit more about where I'm supposed to go or things like that? Sometimes you can get a little bit more out. But in cases, where security personnel are obviously doing their job well, and you've got badge readers and no unlocked doors, is something that I'd like to highlight. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any other questions or maybe a comment on anything?
Yeah, I was just curious because I couldn't see it on your website. Is this something that Sprocket Security offers, or would this have to be kind of contracted through a different company?
We absolutely do this. Not sure why. I guess Carly can take a note of that. Or maybe if somebody has like a direct link, but we absolutely do this. I do this. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, when I was just on there, it said external, internal, social, and web applications. So I was just curious if does that get rolled into the internal, or is it like a separate package?
It may end up actually getting rolled into social engineering too. I'm not sure. That it's not really my my wheelhouse. I just do the the thing. But no, I mean, we absolutely do this for as a service. Yeah.
And the reason I ask is, we're getting more and more serious about like active assailant drills and how do we handle all of that. And, if we can figure out how to make this as like flipping difficult as possible to get in, and it kind of helps reduce all those kind of scenarios. So,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
All right, well, sounds like there is no more questions or comments from people. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today on this webinar. We are planning to do another one in beginning of January timeframe. So just watch for emails about that if you're interested in joining any more of our webinars. And everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks all. Thanks for sticking around.